spoilers for the first 4 episodes of Moonflower Murders. Since the first episode, we've been asking the important questions. What happened to the missing daughter Cecily? Who killed Frank Parris 8 years ago? Why did Stefan confess? How did Alan Conway solve it? Why didn't he tell the police? In the novel Atticus Takes the Case, who killed the actress Melissa James? We've gotten a lot of clues and possible answers to those questions. Now the show sticks us in the gut with yet another question. Who stabbed John Spencer? Clue Crew, I know that some of you may have solved some of the questions, but have you solved all of them? You need to solve them fast. In the next episode, episode 5, the show is going to provide some of the answers. At least 2 of those questions are going to be answered in the next episode. Do you know the answers? Have you caught the clues? Let's solve Moonflower Murders, episode 4. Susan meets with Alan's ex-partner and learns a shocking secret. We'll be breaking down each episode for clues, suspects, and red herrings on the hunt to learn all the dang questions we've been asking, plus who killed John Spencer. Spoilers for the first 4 episodes of Moonflower Murders. If you haven't seen the first 4 episodes, pause this video, run upstairs to get your shoes and jacket, and then come back and watch. Use the timestamps below to jump to the topic or suspect that you want to hear, and skip past things you don't want to hear. At the end of this podcast, I'll be reviewing some great feedback, including some from people who I'm pretty sure have solved this mystery. Plus, I'm going to give another minor, barely existent hint as to who killed Melissa James after your feedback. I've mentioned it every episode, we're just under 8,000 subscribers. We're clawing and scratching trying to get our way to 10,000 subscribers. So if you like this, please subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it really does mean so much to us. Before we run down the suspects, let's see what episode 4 taught us about the real-life story in the present timeline. Where is missing person Cecily Treherne? As we heard about last week, the week of the wedding, Cecily was a bit of a mess. She was freaking out over losing her father's pen, which was the something borrowed. At the same time, she was a bit frustrated with her father for not closing the hotel for the weekend and allowing annoying guests like Frank Parris to complain and make everybody's life miserable. Sometime after the wedding and after Frank Parris was murdered, Cecily was interviewed by author Alan Conway. This was on the 24th of July, 2015. Turns out she and Aiden actually had to postpone their honeymoon because of the murder and everything that went wrong. Cecily trusted Stefan, but of course he had a full confession. Why? Why would he confess? Where is Cecily? What did we learn about murder victim Frank Parris in this episode? Well, it feels like a lot. 8 years ago, Frank Parris, he was such a buzzkill. He interrupted Aiden and Cecily while they were canoodling. Frank was not only a jerk and a buzzkill, he was also a liar. He complained that the key card to his room quit working, but of course it was still working. He made a big boast of how he was going to see the opera, The Marriage of Figaro, and he didn't go to the opera because it wasn't playing. Where did Frank go the night he was killed? Now we should note, this is something that ties to the book. Melissa James's husband, John Spencer, told everybody he went to the opera, The Marriage of Figaro, in the novel Atticus Takes the Case. But of course, John Spencer didn't go. Where did Frank go that night? Now, in Frank's life, stuff we already know. He liked to play games, he liked to have all the power. Frank used sex workers, and he hired James Taylor a handful of times. And he encouraged Alan Conway to come out of the closet. Frank, totally creepy, he hands James Taylor off to Alan if like, I'm done with this one, you can have him, Alan. Oh, then he runs to have another night of paid sex with a sex worker named Leo. This Leo is obviously important, and we find out that Leo may have been Australian, because Alan Conway said he just got back from Melbourne and had jet lag. Now, Frank Parris later moved to Australia. Did he meet Leo there? Or did Leo encourage him to leave England and go to Australia? Okay, let's look at the suspects in real life, and we're going to start with our detective, Susan Ryland. Susan is investigating missing Cecily, but she's also living her life. Susan goes to an interview for the position of senior editor. She misses publishing. She is a proven editor. She had hits with Alan Conway's Atticus series, Craig Andrews' book series, and apparently a series called The White Dagger. But the interviewer tells her, hey, Susan, you might be old news. You're not on Instagram or Book Talk. She doesn't even really think deeply about romantasy. Oh boy, my sister reads a lot of romantasy. That is where the book world is right now. Susan doesn't want to hear it. She snaps at the idea of social media influencers being authors and selling lots of books. She's asked to give her opinion on a Lucy Foley book cover called The Last Weekend. Now the cover, look at it closely everybody, it features a beautiful model as a corpse, but above her on the floor is a bloody hammer. Did this model die just like Frank Parris? Now Susan, she's also a critic of book covers. She says it's below the author Lucy Foley, even though it was the interviewer's idea. Ouch! Have you guys ever failed an interview like this? I have. This is hilarious and painful to watch at the same time. She's having a nice dinner, staying at author Craig's house, and she's a bit jealous of her sister. Her sister has a stable life with a husband, with kids. But later on, Craig makes a little move, and Susan is not exactly single. She runs out, leaves her phone behind. What do you guys think? Are you invested in Susan's personal life, or do you just want to solve the mystery? Andreas, whoa, here we go. He's thinking of selling the hotel to his cousin Giannis. He's not going to keep the hotel if it makes Susan miserable. He's going to find her in England. If she doesn't want to return to the hotel, he's not returning to the hotel. He's going to stay in England. He's going to stay with his woman. Cecily's father, hotel owner Lawrence Treherne. Lawrence briefly talked to author Alan Conway. Note that Lawrence says many journalists had come and stayed at the hotel trying to do the story. There's also slight hints that Lawrence, in addition to hiring Stefan, who had been a guy out of prison, Lawrence might have hired other convicts, past convicts I should say, to work in the hotel. The idea would possibly be as a way to get them back into society, but was there another more nefarious reason? Cecily's husband, Aiden. 8 years ago, Aiden was being a good groom. He was trying to calm his bride down when she was freaking out, giving her some soft word, romantic cuddling, hard drinks. Those all work. But even he had to deal with the creep Frank Parris. And Aiden's behavior kind of was like last week. Aiden got a bit frustrated with Susan last week when he found out how much money she was making. This week, Aiden tells Alan Conway to stop interviewing the staff and asking intrusive questions. Alan Conway didn't take too kindly to Aiden, so he made Aiden a character with no scruples, Algernon Marsh. Stefan, we really haven't seen him since the first episode, and of course that was a flashback to 8 years ago in the past, but we keep hearing it. Stefan made a full confession to the murder of Frank Parris. Why did he do it? Nobody seems to believe he did it. Why did Stefan confess? We didn't see Susan's sister Katie this week, but we found out, Katie's house is for sale. Best-selling, but not quite as selling as much as he used to, author Craig Andrews. Now, Craig probably has nothing to do with the murders and the questions we're trying to ask. He's single, he's got a swanky house in London, and with the worst humble brag of all time, Craig boasts that his books are quite popular in prison. You go, Craig. Craig does help Susan track down Stefan. He gets Susan access the prison via a literacy program. But of course, to see him, Susan needs Stefan to agree to see her. Craig, oh boy, kind of a jerk when he answers Susan's phone and gives the wrong impression to Andreas. James Taylor. Viewers met James in the first series, Magpie Murders. James was Alan Conway's ex-partner who inherited all of Alan's wealth. James has moved on, he's about to get married, his life is great now. James not only knew Alan Conway, but he knew Frank Parris. Frank hired James as a sex worker. It was Frank Parris who introduced James, or kind of handed him off to Alan Conway. James claims he never read any of Alan's books until he became a character in the books, starting in the 5th Atticus Boone novel. James provides a treasure trove of notes that Alan made when he was writing the 3rd book, even interviews he did with the Trehernes. Author Alan Conway. When Alan knew Frank, Alan was still in the closet. Of course, he was still married with a wife and a child. He was very worried about people in the public finding out that he was homosexual. Alan worried it would ruin his career as a teacher. It was certain it would ruin his marriage. Was he worried it would ruin his writing career? Frank Parris became like a mentor to Alan, helping him explore his sexual feelings. He encouraged Alan to fool around. At a certain point, Alan did come out of the closet, and according to James, Alan found out that nobody cared about his sexual preference. Alan's 3rd book, the focus of this series, Atticus Boone Takes the Case, was dedicated to Frank and Leo in remembrance. Was Leo dead? Did Frank kill Leo and somebody killed Frank in retribution? Alan had all sorts of notes on the hotel where Frank was killed, including a flyer. Now, I'm not in marketing, but this is just my thought seeing this. Have you ever seen a pamphlet for the hotel which shows big pictures of the staff rather than pictures of the amenities? Who's running Branlow Hall? It was really great to see so much of Alan in this episode because Alan, he had a giant opinion of himself, and when nobody recognized him, it's hilarious. I LOL'd every time Alan would tell somebody, oh, I'd never use real people in the books. What do you guys think? Do you have clues to where Cecily is? Do you have an idea of who killed Frank Parris? What are your thoughts on the series through 4 episodes? This episode featured so much of Alan Conway, and in some ways I think that's maybe why the first book and series was so successful. Alan was the murder victim, but he was also the focus of Magpie Murders, and Alan is a hilarious, pompous, terrible character, and he's really fun to watch. What do you guys think? Do you like this series more, or do you like Magpie Murders more? Go down in the comments and let me know. Okay, let's dive back into the novel, Atticus Poon Takes the Case. This was a dramatic part of the episode. I loved this part of the episode, all focused in the world of 1954. This episode only taught us a few more things about the murder victim, Melissa James. Apparently, Melissa knew that the stocks Algernon sold her were worthless. And of course, the most important point, Melissa's husband John Spencer drove to see the opera, but then he came back to the house and he strangled Melissa in the bedroom, killing her. Ooh. Turning to the characters in the novel, let's go to our lead detective, Atticus Poon. We begin looking at Chapter 11, Darkness Falls. Once again, I love this part of the episode. This was really good. Now, Poon takes Detective Chubb and Miss Cain to dinner. We find out he's a fan of the opera, but he's against the death penalty. When John Spencer confessed, Poon wonders why that doesn't answer every question, like why Melissa didn't lock the door when John Spencer was going to attack her. Before Poon can go into his question, someone appears at the window of the house. He and Detective Chubb rush to catch that intruder, but possibly not in time, because John Spencer is stabbed. In something that I think we do need to focus on, Atticus told Detective Chubb and Miss Cain that no less than 7 people had reasons to kill Melissa James. Film producer Oscar Berlin, the hotel manager Lance Gardner and his wife Maureen, Algernon Marsh, Peeping Tom Eric and his mother Phyllis, and Melissa's husband John Spencer. Now, Secretary Madelaine Cain, she is hashtag ice cold when it comes to whoever killed Melissa James. She wants that person hanged. She wants the person who is responsible for killing the movie star. She wants that person dead. Algernon Marsh, as he's described by the author, he has no decency, no scruples, no loyalty. To prove how terrible Algernon is, Alan Conway had him search through his brother-in-law's desk. His brother-in-law's a doctor. He's searching through his desk. Algernon finds out about the inheritance that is only going to his sister Samantha. Algernon wants his half of the inheritance, so he threatens Dr. Collins. Algernon's sister Samantha isn't in this episode. She isn't there to see her brother's discovery of the inheritance. Her husband believes that she's in church. That husband, Dr. Leonard Collins, he may have some secret of his own. Algernon is threatening him, blackmailing him about some secret that could ruin Dr. Collins' marriage. Handyman at Melissa James' mansion, Eric. Eric is very nervous that the police are back at the house. Is he going to be arrested for being a peeping Tom or something else? Eric's mother, Phyllis, has had enough. She barks at her son that the police are there because of his shameful peeping behavior. Melissa James' husband, John Spencer. John Spencer lied about going to the opera. The performance was canceled. When confronted, he says he's not surprised that his wife had an affair. He says he didn't know who she was having the affair with, though. John reveals that he didn't go to the opera. He came back to the house. He strangled his wife. He plans to confess, but rather than put him in the car immediately, John is allowed to be alone and go get his shoes and coats? What a terrible detective. Justice is given to John Spencer as he is stabbed and falls down the stairs. But is he dead? Yeah, he's probably dead. Detective Inspector Chubb. Detective Chubb discovers that there was no opera that night. The lead singer in The Marriage of Figaro was struck down in a car accident, and we know who the driver of that car was, hit-and-run guy Algernon Marsh. Ooh, you have so many clues, so many theories you can make. I want to hear them. Reach out to us on social media at PHQ. That's the word double, the single letter P for podcast, HQ for headquarters, at PHQ on Twitter, Instagram, Threads, Facebook.com/PHQ. If you're on YouTube, go down in the comments. I want to hear it. I think you can solve most of these, maybe all of these mysteries. Let's hear your thoughts. I'll get to your best feedback now. Evelina, hope I'm pronouncing that right, Evelina wrote, both Frank Parris and Melissa James were killed by Cecily's mom. That's her guess. My thinking is that the common most important similarity is the real estate fraud angles, which is why Aiden/Algernon is my number 2. Cecily is a distant number 3 for the real-life murder of Frank Parris. Ooh, love those thoughts. A great member of the Clue Crew community is Lauren Garcia. She gave a lot of great feedback, but this is my favorite. Lauren wrote, I can't help but wonder about the petty thefts around the hotel. I keep wondering if the dog might have stolen items and stashed them somewhere. Love that thought. Bob noted in this episode that Susan's got that beautiful red car and she always kind of drives it abruptly. Good point, Bob. We need that car. Temmie wrote, my first guess for the murder of Melissa James is Poon's secretary, Madelaine Cain. Something about the way she's moving is suspicious to me, especially since she was the one that encouraged Poon to take the case in the first place. Susan agreed with her and wrote, I do not trust Madelaine Cain. She's too much of a Melissa superfan. Bear Woody wrote this, and we're going to get into some adult content here for 1 second. Bear Woody wrote, Aiden's tattoo somewhat resembles a stylized sperm, just the sort of thing a male sex worker might have. He also suspects that Phyllis murdered Melissa James. Considering the peephole in Psycho and the weird relationship between the mother and son in Psycho, and you've got this weird relationship between Phyllis and Eric in the novel, he thinks that also makes a Hitchcock connection with Melissa James, an idea Alan Conway would likely steal. Love that thought. This last bit of feedback is going to lead into our hint at the end of this podcast, so if you don't want any hints, skip away, and it starts with this feedback from Luca. Luca wrote, last week on the podcast you said, the solution to the Melissa James murder is an Agatha Christie solution to a T. And then Luca wrote, people who only saw Agatha Christie's more famous ones thinks they all did it? Well, okay, Luca, let me go a bit further, and this is a general spoiler for Agatha Christie if you want to solve them. It's kind of a hint, a thing you should always think about. Agatha Christie would only present a time window, meaning the murder could have only taken place between A and B times. She would only say that and have that in her novel if that was a false lead, if it was a way to point you in the wrong direction. So that's all I'm going to say. You think about some of Agatha Christie's famous books with timelines that weren't exactly true, I think you may have another hint to solving who killed Melissa James. Next week, we're going to be back talking about Episode 5, and Episode 5 is going to reveal some answers to some of these mysteries. The description is, the Endicotts reveal someone had a motive to kill Cecily. Ooh, no. Talk to you next week.